Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Bennick with the Numismatic portal, and I am here today with Eric Schena and his cat Mischief, appropriately named. This interview really is with Mischief. Eric is just supplementary to that. But Eric, thanks for being here today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Greg.
Awesome. Well, just a little background, everybody. Eric and I met last year at the ANA show. Is that right? Yeah, I think it was at the
That is
ANA.
correct.
Yep, at the ANA show. So we struck up a conversation because we had a connection through the Token of Metal Society, both an interest in tokens of metals, but also a literal connection, a person, Dave Schenkman, through the Token of Metal Society, and we started chatting. Well, within the first 5 minutes of chatting, from my side of the conversation, as I was asking Eric, as I often ask people, what do you collect? What are you interested in? Eric had given me a list of things, and where normally somebody will say something that I can relate to, collect, or I'm interested in. The list of things that Eric was absolutely fascinated by were either things I'd never heard of, things I never imagined collecting, and I was immediately interested. So I said, let's do an interview, and this can be almost a 101 for people like me who have no idea about some of the things that you find interesting. So I'm really glad that we get a chance to talk today.
Yeah, I am too. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's put ourselves back at the ANA. We're standing on the bourse floor, and you don't have to remember word for word, but I ask you, so Eric, I mean, you're, on the board of directors, the board of governors, is it, of TAMS, or board of directors?
Board of Governors.
Board
It's
of governors.
technically Board of Governors, but we're basically Board of Directors.
There you go. Yep. So you're on the board at TAMS, and you've won a number of awards. Mishler Cataloging Award. You've won. I think, is it named after Dave Schenkman, the Dave Schenkman Literary Award?
Yes, I won a Dave Schenkman Literary Award, as well as the bronze version of that as well.
I
So
love it. So there you go. So I've got that much of a background. We're standing on the bourse floor, and I ask you, so Eric, what do you collect?
Oh, I collect basically the items that are off the beaten trail. The path less traveled would probably be the best description for it. My primary hobby is my primary focus on in collectibles is the numismatic history of the Mid-Atlantic region, which is primarily Virginia, which is where the state that I call my adopted home, Maryland, D.C., Delaware, North Carolina, and West Virginia. Those are my core states. And by numismatics of those states, I am talking about the early paper money, colonial paper money, fiscal instruments, tokens, store script, pickers, checks, all sorts of things of that kind, and including foreign coins that circulated here in the Mid-Atlantic prior to the establishment of the U.S. Mint. So I run the whole gamut, and a little bit of a national currency, national banknotes, though that sometimes gets a little bit out of my price range, so I don't have that many from my area.
So of that list, where do you think your main focus or area of expertise is in particular? Is it each and all of those things, or is it one in particular or a few in particular?
I would have to say it is probably store tokens, general store tokens, and coal script mining script. That is my primary area of expertise, with a side expertise in pre-Civil War paper money as well. And when it comes to pre-Civil War paper money, that is almost exclusively in relation to the state of Virginia, including the counties that now comprise the state of West Virginia.
Now, did you work on the Virginia Tokens book with Dave Schenkman?
I did indeed, in the second edition.
Yeah, great.
I helped him with the cataloging there, as well as doing the layout and arranging it, and going around out in the field trying to find some new tokens to list, and also photographs of some of the stores and other related artifacts. One of the things that I find particularly fascinating with store tokens is, unlike, say, a 1909 VDB penny, store tokens, you can pretty much tell exactly where it was used, and in some cases, who used the token. Like, you can put names to these people. And I like to go and try and get some of that history, because a lot of it is what an architecture person would call vernacular. It wasn't meant to last. It was purely utilitarian, and a lot of that history has disappeared, in particular with general stores and coal mining camps. You will find with coal mining camps, especially, they're ghost towns. Now, the famous ghost towns are all out west because of the gold and silver rushes and things like that. But there are ghost towns in the east too, and they vanish, and no one will have any kind of notion that it was even there, except in many cases the tokens.
That's
Uh,
pretty amazing.
yeah, it's really kind of interesting. If you don't mind me doing a little bit of show and tell here.
Please do. And if you can add a slight bit of light to you as you do, we might be able to see things better.
Yeah, let me see what I can do about
There you
that.
go. Now, I noticed that Mischief walked away as soon as we started talking about coins. Is that representative of Mischief not enjoying coins, or?
Yeah, she's probably bored stiff. It's all right. Yeah, she's got a cat bed up on my desk.
Very
I
nice.
actually have several cat beds. My wife and I both have a bunch of rescue cats,
Great. I
so
love
we've taken care of them. But yeah, one of the things I wanted to show was about general stores out here. Is like, for instance, this is a town called Henry, and Henry is in Mineral County, West Virginia. I should say was in Mineral County, West Virginia. There is quite literally nothing there now. It was a coal camp that lasted maybe about 15, 20 years or so. And there are no tokens from Henry, but this is a book of coupons that were used at the company store, just like the coal script. And no one would even know where Henry, West Virginia was if it wasn't for something like this, and people trying to preserve that history. And so part of the what I did for Dave was go around and look for some of the store buildings and identify them and photograph them before they were gone. And in one case in particular, the store did in fact disappear not long after I took photos of it, and it was and it's in the book now. It was a store in a place called Rileyville, Virginia, which is in Page County. It's butts up against what is now Shenandoah National Park, or Skyline Drive, and it was a store building that was not long after I took photos of it. It got paved over for a church parking lot. So that's the type of thing that's important to go around and document, and that's one of the reasons why I specialize in this type of thing with tokens and script. Is many of these buildings, they disappear and the history just disappears with them.
That's incredible. I mean, truly incredible. There was a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I used to go out on the road and do these. I still speak professionally, but I would go out on the road and do these spoken word tours. And there was one night where I had off on a tour in the West in Utah. And the guy who was booking me was like, well, you've got this night off. And I said, well, I want to do something unusual. So I actually made an announcement that I was going to be speaking in an abandoned gold mining town.
Yeah,
And that anyone interested from Salt Lake City who was interested in hearing me speak in an abandoned gold mining town could come drive 3 hours into basically into the wild and come to this abandoned gold mining town. And we set up in this literally abandoned, used to be a town here area where there was just some mining equipment and some smelting equipment remaining.
yeah,
We set up a campfire, and there was about 6 or 7 people who showed up, and it was half camping, half me doing my spoken presentation about legacy and whatnot, and the things I was speaking on that applied to that particular night. And we put up a sign that announced that any of the ghosts of this old mining town who wanted to come to see this event, that they could come for free. And it was pretty remarkable. I did this presentation in the middle of this town. And the reason I bring it up is because it speaks exactly to what you were talking about, that nothing was there of that town. And if you
yeah,
saw it was just residue of, industry, quote unquote, and people, living there. But realistically, without bringing something to it, without your research, without the token that you identify as being from that town, the town would be gone without the spoken word show, the token, the research, the piece of script that you, whatever it is that
Yeah.
you might have. So it's pretty fascinating the way that we can keep history alive in a way, quite literally through our hobby or through our actions or through our research or our interest.
Yep. Yep. I absolutely agree. If I may ask, what was the town that you were
Um,
speaking in?
I knew you were going to ask me, and the second I'm going to look it up while we're talking. Okay, I got it. It was Frisco, Utah, and I know nothing
Frisco,
about it. Yeah,
Utah. I
Frisco,
have heard of it.
really?
I have heard of it because it was once, it is known as one of the most dangerous wild towns in the West.
That's right.
Yeah, and I actually have a token from Frisco. So,
No way.
yeah,
I've I just got goosebumps for the first time in any Newman Numismatic Portal interview. That's amazing. Let me
yes.
let me know if you ever encounter another token from Frisco, but please tell us about, do you remember anything about the token from Frisco that you might have?
No, I don't. There's not an awful lot of information on this particular merchant, and it's one that has it does have a little bit of disputed attribution. Let's see if I can lay my hands on it.
And while you do, I'll explain to
Of course
people.
not.
I'll explain. Well, it's okay. I'll explain to people that you're absolutely right. That that's all I know about Frisco, Utah, is that it was this lawless place filled with
Yeah,
gambling and murder and all sorts of things. And all that's left now, as you drive up to it, is some smelters, a whole bunch of mining equipment. I could probably put some photos in in the video part of this interview of it. There's mining equipment. There's piles of rubble and the legacy of my spoken word show, which was the first
yeah,
live event in Frisco, Utah in over 100 years.
yeah. I've if memory serves me correctly, Frisco had a silver mine called the Horn Silver Mine, and it was a huge mine. It was an underground working, and if I think this is the right town that I'm remembering, it collapsed, and there were a massive number of deaths at that mine.
Wow.
Uh, 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 have to do some research on that a little bit more, but the town did bounce back a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those Western ghost towns. I like Western ghost towns too. I have a very small collection of store tokens from the West. I briefly lived in Southern California at Edwards Air Force Base. And around there, there were two types of mines, gold mines and borax mines. The world's largest borax open pit was just north of the base in a place called, appropriately named, Boron. And I remember as a kid, first off, getting into rock hounding while I was out there, and two, going to that open pit mine. At the time, it was called the U.S. Borax Mine. It's now owned by Rio Tinto, if I remember correctly. And it's just this enormous. You've never seen a hole that big, enormous hole in the ground trying to dig all these minerals out. And we learned a little bit about California's Wild West history while we were living there, but I never really got into it until later when I started collecting tokens and getting uh, that piece of history, having a physical piece of history and being able to place it in a specific town. Like, for instance, having a saloon token from Frisco or from any of those other places, or Rhyolite in Nevada, or um, I wish, Bodie, California. Bodie is one of the most famous of the ghost towns, and there are tokens known from Bodie, and they fetch appropriate prices. They're not cheap. I don't have one, so I wish I did. But no, I've always liked that kind of thing. So I've kind of adopted that here since moving to Virginia in 1984. But I still collect things. I mean, this is Utah. This is a panic script from a gold mine, an abandoned town in Kimberly. Now, the script is usually listed under Richfield, Utah, but that was because that was the nearest banking town. The actual town where this was used was 100 miles away in a place called Kimberly, way up high in the mountains, and there's nothing there now. And things like this, that's the history. And I consider myself a steward of that history. And that is especially important with Western gold mines and non-gold, non-precious metal mines, and what they would call hard rock mines as versus coal mines, which is the primary mining around here. Um, uh, 2 hours due west of where I live is the Upper Potomac coal fields, and there are an awful lot of scrip from those mines. Western Maryland has quite a few. Bleeds a little into Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania has a different type of coal. Pennsylvania is primarily anthracite. West Virginia is mostly bituminous. And so,
Tell us the difference, because I've got family from Pennsylvania, and I feel ignorant and a little silly in the moment that I can't remember the difference. But please, for
yeah,
those who don't know.
there is a difference. One has a higher sulfur content than the other, and if and I believe anthracite burns cleaner, but bituminous is more common. Now, lignite, which is also found in certain places in Western Virginia, that burns very dirty. And in fact, there was a town called Lignite in a place called Botetourt County, Virginia. It is a ghost town. It is what an archaeologist would call an ankle bone site. That means the remains don't go any higher than your ankle. So that's a term that I learned in college when my degree's in Greek and Roman archaeology, of all things.
Meaning that everything is leveled to the level of
Yeah, that there's no structure higher than your ankle bone. So they'll sometimes call them ankle bone sites. And lignite is entirely in the Jefferson National Forest now, and there are tokens from there, and I do in fact have one.
I love this. I
But
love
that's
this.
all that remains of that town.
And I love what you said about being a steward of the history,
Yes.
right? And I mean, and not to bring it back to this Frisco, Utah experience, but we felt that night like we were doing something, and I'm putting this in air quotes, important, meaning that what we were doing wasn't important to anybody else, but historically we were remembering something and thus making it real again. And you're doing the same thing when you hold up a piece of currency from a town 100 miles from a bank that doesn't exist anymore. You're the one
Yeah,
talking about that place today and keeping it alive and keeping it real.
yeah. Yeah, exactly, and that's how I feel about it. And then that's one of the reasons why, with the second edition of Dave's token book, I wanted to include pictures of some of these towns and some of these stores and some of the ephemera that goes with it. If you ever get a copy of the book, there are pieces of billhead, some checks, things like that uh, that tell that story. It gives a little bit more of a human face to these objects. I mean they're inanimate objects, but there's a story behind them, and I want to tell that story. Um, uh, the town that I used to live in here in Virginia, there was a general store maybe about 2.5 miles away from my house. It was the general store, it was the grist mill, and it was also the post office for the town. The place was called Whitaker. It's still there. The store building is still there, though it is abandoned, unfortunately. I don't think the mill building is still there, but there were some cardboard tokens that were issued there. And the great thing about them is they had to be signed. W.C. Whitaker was the first person who owned that store, and then he passed it off to his sons, and one of them was named Landon, and you'll see Landon Whitaker written on some of these tokens. And the funny thing about those is they all came from a batch that Dave himself got. When he and his wife Joanne were going around the state of Virginia collecting tokens and preparing for the book, he actually went to Whitaker and was inquiring about that general store. It was still open at the time, and I happen to know that it was owned by a man by the name of Dolan. But that family lived right across the street from the store, and they invited him over. They had some sweet tea, and he was asking about the tokens, and they brought out a little jar of them, and he picked out a bunch, and so that's where a big chunk of them came from. And that's the kind of story that I love to hear, because those people are no longer there. I don't know who owns that store building anymore, and who knows what's going to happen to it in the future. It could end up like that store in Rileyville, bulldozed for a parking lot. So that's why
And
it's important to preserve that history.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. This is why when we met, I knew we were kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Even if even if you're collecting things I don't necessarily collect, we're kindred. As I've had a growing interest in counter stamps over the last year, and in
Yes.
collecting counter stamps, you'll find a merchant who issued some counter stamps, and you know that that name was stamped by that merchant on that exact coin, and then you find ancillary things relating to that counter stamp. Maybe it's a photo if it's a photographer, or a piece of silver if it's a silversmith. And then you learn about maybe who owned that, or whose photo was taken by the photographer who stamped the counter stamp coin. And this is hours of entertainment and legacy building, and like you said, stewardship of history.
That's exactly what it is. And that's it tells that it continues that story down the line. And we're fortunate in America in that we can that there's so many places that where we can do that. There is such a rich history with script and tokens that a lot of people don't know about. I mean, there are a lot of a lot of people just say, "Who cares? It's just the paper money in your wallet or the coins in your pocket." But 150 years ago, that was not necessarily the case, and even 120 years ago, 80 years ago, tokens are still being used. There are people today that still remember using tokens. Heck, I remember tokens in DC because I went to high school in Northwest DC, and the students there, if you're a DC resident, you could go to the DC Metro and get a roll of tokens that you would use on the bus or on the Metro, mainly the bus. And I remember those tokens, and I remember the students that had them and getting buying the rolls because they would all have to go to Metro Center. That's where you bought them, and you had to have a valid student ID to do that. So uh, that kind of thing disappears in time because a lot of people just don't think much of it. It's just part of daily life. Going to, you know, if you live in a coal camp, going to the company store to go buy a bucket of coal for your furnace or mining equipment or a 5 pound bag of flour because you had to buy all of that at the company store. It was just way of life. That's what you did. And then when the towns closed up shop, that just vanished from memory. And in coal camps, that's a risk. That did happen. There's a story. It's actually an article that I wrote on this town. It's a place called Kempton, and it's in Maryland, but it straddles the line with West Virginia. It's in the if you ever look at a map of Maryland, it's on the very point in Garrett County. And it's between Garrett and Preston County. And the mine, the tipple, the school, the houses, all of that equipment was in Maryland. 25 feet over the state line was where the company store, the post office, and the corporate headquarters were. And the reason why they did that was because in the 1860s, the state of Maryland banned company stores. And they didn't want to have anything to do with that. Get around that, this particular mining company, it was the Davis Coal and Coke Company, made sure that their offices and the post office was in West Virginia. And the tokens actually say Kempton, West Virginia. If you look on Google Maps, it'll probably say Kempton, Maryland, because that's where the majority of it is. And in fact, the store building doesn't exist anymore. It's an ankle bone site. It's mostly a foundation course. And what's really interesting about this is in the 1950s, that coal played out. The coal seam ran out, and Davis Coal and Coke decided all of a sudden to just close up shop, and that's exactly what they did. They closed up their office, sealed up the mine, and they sent out a notice saying you had 2 weeks to redeem all your scrip, otherwise, and to vacate. And that's exactly what they did. They grabbed all the scrip that they could pay out. They redeemed it all, and they dumped it down a mine shaft and filled the mine shaft with tailings. So there's a pile of scrip somewhere in Western Maryland, uh, down a very deep hole with a lot of overburden on top of it. And so that's what happened to an awful lot of that scrip. And there's some still around, obviously. I mean, I know about it. There are mining records that still, minting records from Ingle Shirlow that still have the records on all of that. But otherwise, that's what would happen to the stuff. It was considered just an ersatz currency, almost like a gift certificate. And so it wasn't preserved. And whatever is around now just happened to escape being dumped into that pit.
It's so interesting because I was in New York City last week, and many people, you don't have to be 100 years old to remember when there were tokens years ago to ride the subway.
Yep.
And you certainly don't need to be even 50 years old to remember when there were people in the booths that you would purchase access to the subway from, or who would answer questions for you. And now, of course, everything is automated. Pay with your credit card. You don't even need to pay with your credit card. Scan your phone, enter the subway. So what's interesting to me about this and what you're talking about is that the experience of being in New York City and Manhattan and riding the subway is entirely different because of the way we pay. And the experience of being in the coal town back then was entirely different than it could possibly be today because of the way people paid for and purchased items. And the
Exactly.
the script or the token became part of the life experience overall that it isn't replicated today in any way, shape, or form potentially.
Yep, exactly right. People don't realize that prior to the Eisenhower interstate system, it was difficult getting from one major town to another every once in a while. If not everyone had cars, and certainly in 1910, 1920, not everyone did, certainly in the rural areas, it was an effort to go 15, 20 miles, especially if you're in the mines. Because a lot of those mines are in very rural areas, very out of the way areas, difficult to access. And if you are out in those places, getting money there is equally hard as getting tomatoes or whatever. So a lot of places had to make do. And a lot of those companies, the mining companies, would issue their own money for especially that purpose. There was a side benefit for the mine owners in that they could upcharge uh, um, uh, their basically captive
You had no
audience.
other alternative, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you only have the one store in town, you have no choice to pay their prices. And the way store script really um, evolved back then is it became a way almost like a payday advance. A lot of times the prices were very high. The families didn't have enough money to buy all the stuff that they needed, so the miner would have to take an advance on their pay, and they would take that advance in the form of script. And so it all goes back to the company store. That's why Tennessee Ernie Ford sang that song. 16 tons and
What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt.
Exactly. I sold my soul to the company store. Exactly.
That's right.
That's exactly what that was written about. And some companies were better than others, but there was always some form of that there. And what's really fascinating is a lot of other states started catching on and cracking down on it. Coal company script is throughout the United States, and there's coal company script from Alabama, quite a bit from Alabama. There's even some from New Mexico, Colorado, you name it. There's coal company script, but there's one state that stands above all others, and that's West Virginia. And the standard catalog for coal company script is in 2 volumes. Volume 1 is every state except West Virginia. Volume 2 is just West Virginia. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of different types of coal script from West Virginia alone, and that's because the laws in West Virginia were very lax when it came to issuing that kind of stuff. Maryland, it's 2 or 3 pages, and that's about it. and some of that had to be a little sneaky. It wouldn't expressly say Davis Coal and Coke Company. It would have another name. In that particular case, it was Buxton and Land Street. They had it was on paper a separate entity, but in reality owned by the same company. And so that's that kind of yeah,
It's
that kind
amazing.
of nefariousness existed back then. So
So tell me this just before I forget. Who wrote? Was that? Is that a Dave Shankman book? Did he write that book, or did somebody else?
um, no, that was Edkins.
Okay. And I ask about Dave Shankman, who is obviously a mutual friend of both of us because he's,
Yeah.
prolific in the way that Dave Bowers has been prolific. It's like if I hear of a book about some aspect of numismatics that I don't know about, Dave Bowers or Dave Shankman probably wrote the books. That's why.
Yes. Dave Shankman is, as far as I'm concerned, a national treasure when it comes to numismatics. I've been fortunate, I would almost say blessed to have known him for as long as I have. He has taught me so much. He continues to teach me so much, and he has given so much to the numismatic community that I don't think enough good things can be said about the man.
I
So
agree. Even just being at Token and Metal Society, banquets or around people related to Token Metal Society, he walks in the room and it's like one of the members of Metallica just walked into the room.
yeah,
It's like
basically,
he's a rock star. The guy's a rock
yeah,
star.
he is a rock star, and he doesn't like to think of himself as that, but he is, and well, it's earned.
Yeah,
It
for
really
sure.
is earned. Uh,
Let's talk about
national.
yeah, he's a national treasure. I agree 100%, 100%. And all this is fascinating. I feel like we could do an entire interview just on West
Oh,
Virginia
absolutely.
coal script. And we can. We'll do more.
Yep.
Let's talk about emergency money or panic money, because that's something that you've mentioned to me, that if you
Yep.
said to me, Greg, tell me everything you know about emergency or panic money, I'd say I just did. I asked you the question. That's all I know. So tell me and tell us about emergency money or panic money.
Well, panic money is interesting stuff. This is another form of making do. I don't know if you remember some years ago during the dot-com crisis around 2008 or so, California ran out of money to pay their. They didn't run out of money, but they ran out of ways to pay their staff, and they started handing out vouchers. That is technically panic money because we were in a panic, and what was traditionally called a panic, but back then it was, it's the dot-com recession or whatever you want to call it. But that was a foreign panic script. The first best known, it's kind of funny, these panics happen usually in 25-year patterns. There's a panic in 1819, one in 1837, best known as the Hard Times, the Panic of 1857, Panic of 1873, another one in 1893, and then the big one, which was a panic in 1907. And then after that, they became known as depressions. 1930, in 1929, that period, the Great Depression. That's a panic that would be technically considered an economic panic on the same definition. A lot of panic script was issued because the money supply contracted so much so that people couldn't get their money, or the banks were forced to be closed. Roosevelt had very famously had the bank holiday just as soon as he took office in March of 1933. He closed the banks, mandatory bank holiday. There are people that needed to get paid. And how did you pay them? How did these local businesses get paid? They came up with ersatz money. Many places went to the local newspaper shop, ordered up some script. Many communities did that too. Banks would gather together in clearinghouse associations and issue that kind of money, and individual businesses. This coal script, this is actually gold mining script. This is panic money. This particular bank, I should say mine, the Gold Mountain Consolidated Mining Company, ran out of money to pay its miners and had no way of getting that money from Richfield, Utah. So they just quickly ran up some script, and they paid it to their miners with due dates. on it. Like, for instance, this one was payable on August 10th of 1908, this particular one right here. And so that's what they were. It was a form of IOU, of circulating IOU. And a lot of this stuff was intended not to be saved. I mean, this is not very decorative stuff. It's just words. It's purely utilitarian. And many times that was the case. In 1893, there was a monetary shortage in Virginia, in particular, around the gold, not the tobacco fields. There was a bumper crop of tobacco, and there was and then of course the banking contraction of 1893, and so there was no money for the tobacco warehouses to buy product from the farmers. So a lot of the banking clearinghouses, Danville is the one that immediately comes to mind, issued their own script that would be payable later on, and it circulated as money, and they were not intended to be saved. And survival of this stuff is purely by chance because of that. Those California vouchers from, that's only about 15, 20 years ago. I've never seen one. They were not meant to be saved. They were meant to be used and redeemed.
And once redeemed, probably not saved by the issuing body.
Exactly. Especially in this particular day and age where paper files are not as important to maintain, probably destroyed. I'm sure there's some of that, some of those vouchers still around. It was to California public employees, if I remember correctly. But I've never seen one, but that stuff exists, and I find it eminently fascinating, and it's rare as hell too. If you think about it, how many 1909 SVDB pennies have you seen? They're expensive, yeah. They're popular, but you can always get one, and you can always get one even up into MS64, MS65, MS66.
Absolutely.
When was the last time you saw a token from Frisco, Utah?
I didn't even know there was such a thing. Again, goosebumps for the first time in a Numismatic portal interview, because you mentioned that one even exists. Now I'm obsessing about it in my mind that I need to find one someday.
Yeah, they do exist, but they're handfuls. They weren't struck in high quantity. If a store issued more than say 2,000 or 3,000 tokens, that was an average, if not a little higher than average. So we're talking about minuscule amounts of these tokens. There's the Ingalls Shirlow records. Ingalls Shirlow was a script manufacturer that that was in business for quite a number of years in the first half of the 20th century, and their records still exist, and they have minting records. So they will have entries in them saying the name of the customer, the location of the customer, the denominations that they wanted, the little cutouts that they wanted in the tokens, and how many were struck by the die sinker and by the mint. And there are records in there of 100 of one particular denomination, or 200 or 300. We're not talking about large quantities of these things. And when you consider that they weren't meant to be saved, even fewer are around nowadays. So a lot of that stuff is only survives by happenstance.
It's so interesting because, it really reframes rarity, right? There's some obviously classic American numismatic rarities of, unparalleled order, where there's one of, or that sort of thing. But then even the normal or average or well-known classic numismatic rarities, the 1916 quarter, Standing Liberty quarter, like you said, 1909 SVDB cent. These are minted in the order of tens of thousands or 100,000. But when we're talking about, for example, a counter stamp issued by a merchant, there might be 10 known or 15 or 20 known, or what you're talking about, thousands made 150 years ago, of which how many remain? Hardly any.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a token from a place called Shooting Creek, Virginia. It's in Floyd County. One of only two known. This is rarer than an 1804 dollar. It's rarer than a 1913 V nickel. I didn't pay $4.5 million for it.
well, and that's what's interesting to me, right? Is that, that some of these more obscure for lack of a better term, areas of numismatics or collecting yield opportunities for people to acquire rarities on high orders, essentially, like
Yeah,
which don't require vast bank accounts in order to purchase. Like chances of me owning a 1913 nickel, pretty slim. Chance of me owning a token of which there are 5 known, pretty good. There's a chance
yeah,
of that.
they are pretty good.
Yeah.
And what's really funny is you can sometimes get them dirt cheap, those very rare tokens. My wife Heather has a fantastic eye for finding these things, and she's from Southwest Virginia, and she would go down and look in some of the antique stores, and she would find all sorts of great tokens. She found this one token from a place called Mayberry. Now, that's a very familiar name to a lot of people, and in fact, it does have a connection to that TV show. Mayberry is located in Patrick County, Virginia. It is actually on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it's only about 20 or so miles away from Mount Airy, where Andy Griffith is from. And he modeled Mayberry on the TV show off of Mount Airy, but he actually admitted to the woman who played his girlfriend on the show. Um, I can't remember her name to save my life, and I feel bad about that
Yeah, I'm
considering
trying to think too.
reruns of it that I've seen. He actually told her that he would visit the general store in Mayberry, Virginia, with his grandfather, and they had an account there, and that's where he grabbed the name. It's from Mayberry, in Patrick County, Virginia. As far as I know, that is a unique token on that denomination. It's one of 2 known. There's another from the merchant, but it's on a different denomination. Merchant's name was IT Banks, and unique. And Heather paid $10 for it.
Incredible. I love it. I love it. It's always fascinated me. And that's why one of the reasons I enjoy this so much is just exploring new areas that people are interested in, but also remembering that we all like these obscure things, but that are actually quite meaningful, meaning that what you just described isn't just some bizarre, interesting, fascinating, weird collecting subset. It's a piece of history that actually has a connection to Hollywood, to television, to popular culture, all in the form of something that cost $10 that you can fit in the palm of your hand.
Yeah, it was $10, and it came out of a antique store in Vesta, Virginia, also in Patrick County.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, that's the kind of history that you go around and you try to preserve. And here's the actually not so much fun as it is important. The important thing is finding these tokens is important. In some cases, if you have 1 or 2 known of those tokens, that's the only piece of evidence nowadays where that store. A lot of those stores, they were built in vernacular buildings that were not intended to last. Many times they go through several ownership changes. The ownership changes get forgotten in the ghost of in the mists of history. And a lot of times having those tokens is one of the few tangible items from that. And that goes back to another numismatic aspect of mine. I also do ancient coins, ancient and medieval coins.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Ancient and medieval Central Asian, which is very important.
Well, because when we met, and I remember asking you that day, you mentioned ancient coins at the time, and I have an interest in them as well. And I asked you what specifically. Well, you started listing dynasties that I had never heard of. And I didn't do poorly in school. I didn't do great all the time. But the dynasties that you mentioned had a lot of syllables, and I didn't recognize any of them. So please have at it and explain to us, your collecting areas of interest in ancients and whatnot, and mention a couple dynasties and impress us.
Oh, sure. My specialty, in fact, my degree is in Greek and Roman archaeology. That's actually how I met my wife. She has the exact same degree. And I do like Greek and Roman and Byzantine coins. But what's really interesting about some of the ancients are the ones that come out of Central Asia. And I'm talking about the Greco-Bactrian, the Indo-Greek, the Indo-Scythian coinage and similar dynasties, the Hephthalites, for instance, the Kushans, those dynasties out there. In many cases, The names of the kings are only known from the coins. That is certainly the case with the later Indo-Greek coins. And in fact, there was a Kushan king. He was only known as Soter Megas, which is great savior in Greek, because most of the coins, that was the only title that was on them, was Soter Megas. And it was only through an inscription that was found uh, in an archaeological site in the 1990s, tied to a couple of bronze coins, that the man's name was actually identified as Vimatakto. But the fact is, it was years and years and years, no idea who that man was. And this king, who knew who he was? We can now put a name to him. And in some of the other Indo-Greek kings, the order and the dating is entirely done by numismatics, because there's no archaeological evidence otherwise. And so a lot of that is important. And that kind of translates to a different degree, same discipline, but different field with the tokens and store tokens. With the ancients, finding those little pieces and knowing that you're holding a coin that is really the only written record of this particular king having ever ruled is fascinating. And this is especially important with the Islamic dynasties from that area as well. A lot of that stuff is not necessarily as well understood. In particular, the Karakhanids. The actual name that they called themselves is not known. Most people refer to them as the Ilak Khans or Karakhanid dynasty, and they spanned a period of about 200-300 years. This was around 11, 12, 1300 or so, probably a little on the earlier side of that. I know them mostly from the Hijra dating rather than the modern dating, but hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of various little rulers, sub-rulers, and other khans and sub-khanates, and they're all over the place, and how they all tie to each other. And it's a science. It's an absolute science, and a lot of that is not well understood anywhere. And so numismatics has an awful lot to contribute in places like that. It contributes here in the United States in preserving our history with tokens, and also abroad with ancient coins and things like that.
So
And
it's so cool.
yeah, one of the things that I think Europe does pretty interestingly enough is they treat numismatics as a scientific discipline. And they actually have courses, and you can get professorships in numismatics in several schools in Europe. And I think that's very valuable. To them, it is exactly like a pottery specialist on a archaeological site, because you have to have a specialist in that. And, is this Samian redware, or is it some other type of pottery? Because that might date the site. And coins are very valuable for that, as well as pottery. And so there is an importance with these little things that we use every day.
Yeah, I mean, immensely so. And you've expressed that so clearly. And, it just, even listening to you share these ideas, it becomes evident that coins are not just tools when they're made to pay for things, but they're tools for us archaeologically, historically, in order to understand elements of the future or elements of the past, which would not have lasted into the future had it not been for the coins themselves.
Exactly. And there are an awful lot of institutions out there that don't have the manpower to do an awful lot of research that serious collectors of ancients and medieval coins, or coins in general, do on a regular basis. I mean, a lot of the great collections of coins have been formed by private individuals who, through their generosity, have made those collections publicly available for study. And that has helped a lot of people. And thankfully, they get published in books like the Siloge Numorum Grecorum series, things like that. That's spreading that knowledge, and that's very important and very crucial. And it's something that I'm a very strong believer in. I'm not particularly keen on withholding information because I'm interested in something being worth more money than if I hold on to it and just, hoard it. There's a lot of this stuff that has information, has valuable information, and that information deserves to be out there and shared. And so I do like to share that information when I can find good things like that. And I have an open library policy um, with my friends who collect. They have anything that they want research in, let me know, and they can go to my library at any time. I have a fairly extensive library, mostly on tokens and other oddball stuff, but I also have business directories. Dave Shankman, I don't know if you can see in the background, that is a microfiche reader. And that's, yeah, I know. I have a microfiche reader, and right below it is a set of microfiche of business directories from 1800 to 1861 for the United States. And so, yeah.
Wow.
I know that's a blast from the 1980s.
But it's awesome and I love it. And I'm
Yeah.
going to utilize your offer for information requests, because there's going to be some point where I'm going to find a counter stamp and I'm going to wonder who was
Yeah.
around and a merchant in Indiana in 1847, and you're the person I'm going to call.
If there's a business directory between 1800 and 1861, there's probably a good bet that I can get to it. But the thing is again, those things, that's all on microfiche. And this kind of goes with a lot of the technology and making sure this stuff doesn't get forgotten. Microfiche is not something that you see every day anymore. I'm a Gen Xer, and anytime I went to the library, I had to use those machines, both in high school and in college. But they all got supplanted with the internet. Don't need them anymore. It's all computerized. Now that technology is an obsolete technology, and the knowledge of learning how to use those things is just going to disappear because an awful lot of microfiche got thrown out, and so that's knowledge that just gets tossed, mainly because nobody has a reader. Because where are you going to get a microfiche reader?
That's true, but we also rely on the fact that that information is placed on the internet, meaning there might
Exactly.
be tablets with cuneiform that exist in the world that have information on them that's just not yet on the internet, and there might be business directories from 1827 in your collection that aren't on the internet anywhere that
Exactly.
So
That's exactly right. The digitization of early documents, something that the Numismatic portal has done uh, uh, fantastically, I might add, uh, is a very important addition to scholarship. I know I've donated a few of my works for digitization, and I'm a firm believer in that. But you're exactly right; those aren't going to be necessarily complete because who knows? There's probably some weird guy in Virginia who's got a stack of microfiche of these directories from Philadelphia from 1811. But they're all a microfiche. So yeah,
it's pretty amazing. It's pretty
or-
amazing. I know that I've had interactions with the Newman portal myself about this, because my dad wrote a compendium. I've mentioned this, I think, in another interview. I can't recall, but my dad wrote a compendium of railroad and railroad related metals and tokens. I think that's the exact title: a compendium of U.S. and Canadian railroad and railroad related metals and tokens, including bridge metals and tokens. Brevity of title selection was not his forte, but he wrote this compendium. And he sold copies of it. He printed it himself, sold copies for years. And when he decided to sell his token and metal collection, he sold the collection. He got rid of all the books, sold them, gave them away or whatnot, and then deleted the computer files. And I only found this out. I only found this out recently. I was asking him, so what happened to you? I've got a copy of your the fourth issue of your compendium here. Where the rest of them? To make a long story short, another story for another time, he told me, he said he got rid of the files, not out of malice. He just thought, I don't need these anymore. And I was like, well, then that information's lost. So I've put it upon myself to find editions of each of the editions of his book. I've found now each of the extant editions of his book, and I'm going to be digitizing them for the Numismatic portal and then sending physical copies to libraries, because I've met people who have used this book and rely on it for information. And the fact of the matter is, without the digitization, without the saving of the history, whether on microfiche or on Dave Bennick's printouts of my dad's work, it would be gone. It'd be lost. So who knows what's in that microfiche collection of yours that doesn't exist anywhere else? I'm kind of fascinated by that.
Exactly. And it's there's a lot of scholars out on the putting shoe leather to ground to go out there and doing all that legwork trying to find all this stuff. I'll tell you another story. It's about my local town of Winchester. The Many years ago, I was searching on eBay for random stuff around here. There was a ledger that showed up on eBay, and it was for a pre-Civil War bank that was based here. It was the Farmers Bank of Virginia at Winchester, and it was the Board of Directors meeting minutes from 1845 to 1849. It was on eBay. I bid on it. I won it, and I went to the dealer was local, so I actually said, "Hey, why don't I just come by and pick it up?" And so I drove to his place, and he pulled it out and started talking about it. Showed me the book, and it was in tatters. It had condition issues. I started flipping through it, and it was all kinds of great material in it. Had vault inventories. They met every 2 weeks, every Thursday, if I remember correctly, twice a month on a Thursday, and they would talk about all the bank's business. They would talk about loaning money to the fire damaged Taylor Hotel, which is now in the Walking Mall in Winchester. They would talk about returning spoiled banknotes back to the mother bank in Richmond for destruction. Things like that. All sorts of little pieces of information is all throughout it. It would say that X number of $30 bills were in circulation, and yes, that was a bank that used $30 bills, and they were still in use at that particular point in time. And it would talk about them coming over the counter and stuff like that. And I started saying, "This is a great resource." And he looked at me and he said, "I'm glad that you bought this because you see that signature? That's James Murray Mason." James Murray Mason, for those who don't know, was Virginia senator from 1847 to 1861. He co-authored the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. He's a grandson of George Mason, and he was president of the Winchester branch of the Farmers Bank of Virginia for a number of years. He also happened to have been he's one of the 11 senators who were kicked out of the Senate for being secessionist. And so, because he was an ardent secessionist, and he joined the Confederate government as a plenipotentiary to Great Britain. And he was in British waters on the Trent when a U.S. warship intercepted it and arrested him and a gentleman by the name of James Slidell, and arrested them in British waters. And Parliament was incensed about that, almost enough to join the cause on the Confederate side. And one of the things that Lincoln said to his war secretary was, "Please, one war at a time, find some way of settling this." And this book was signed by Mason. Not only was it signed by Mason, the presiding president of the director of the board of directors meeting would have to sign each entry at the end of it to acknowledge that that is true and correct. He signed the book about 33 times. And this gentleman was telling me that what would have happened to that book had it not sold on eBay is he would have sold it to an autograph collector or a dealer who would have cut out the autograph and tossed the rest of the book. Because they would take the autograph, frame it with like some nice picture of some Civil War scene, and sell that for $200, $300, $400, $500 a pop. They would do that, throw the rest out.
It's like we're not just stewards of history. I think that at times, without inflating our own importance, I think it goes without saying that we need to continue doing the work, the study, the research, the collecting we do, because we might be saving history. I mean, really incredible.
Yeah, not only did I have that book digitized, it's available on the portal, as a matter of fact. I shipped it out so it could get scanned, because I do want scholars to be able to access it. One of the neat things is when Mason was elected senator, he had to resign his position as bank president, and his resignation was read into the minutes. And so there's a copy of that in the minutes, his resignation letter. And I can't think of what a piece of history that is. And that is something that would have been tossed because someone would have just wanted that signature.
I'm so inspired by our conversation. Like, I'm inspired to go back to my collection and just like study and read and think and go through my whole library and do all the same. This has been amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff, and I want to encourage a lot of other collectors to get out there and look into their local histories. Go to their local archives. Uh, drive around, drive around. Just look at old stores. Some people are friendly when you want to talk to them about the history of their old store buildings. It doesn't have to be Virginia. It doesn't have to be a ghost town in the West. It can be anywhere. Uh, Dayton, Ohio has a huge history in numismatics through the Ingle system and other die strikers and coiners. Go to Dayton, Ohio, anywhere, any place, Texas, any state of the union. There are going to be thousands upon thousands of tokens, and they're going to be issued by regular people doing their jobs, and they just wanted to get paid. And a lot of this stuff is stuff that 150 years ago they didn't think anything of it, and it just disappears unless we as collectors and stewards of that history go out and find it and record it. And so that's what I have tried to do, at least with my numismatic career.
I am so glad that we talked today. This has been absolutely wonderful. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we sign off? Because I think that that's a perfect ending point for us today.
Well, all I would have to say is I would like to thank my very understanding wife, and also some really great numismatists for helping me along the way. Dave Shankman, Wayne Homran, and my coin dealer and mentor, Gene Brandenburg. They find someone like those people, and I would encourage anyone watching this video to go out and find someone like Dave or Gene or Wayne, and learn from them. They have a wealth of history, a wealth of knowledge and expertise that you can draw upon. Learn from them, listen to them, and go out there and collect and preserve that history.
Fantastic. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate it. On behalf of the Newman Numismatic Portal, I'm Greg Bennick, and Eric Schena. Thank you so much for taking the time.
And thank you.